We're supposed to be electing people to govern the country. We're supposed to be trying to learn about their character under fire and what they stand for, which I would submit they did learn a lot from the British debates, because there were 3 of them in part. So we need to think about how to fix the debates. We really need, and I promise not to go on about this too long, to fix our electoral system. And I know you've had some debates here in British Columbia about it. I must say I was very crestfallen that the referendum was defeated. I don't think this issue is going to go away, and particularly if Great Britain moves to electoral reform, because that will knock one of the 2 remaining, I think, arguments against electoral reform. One of which is, well, it's the British system, first past the post. Why would we ever want to, try anything new? And if the Brits change it and we become effectively one of I think it'd be us in Zimbabwe, almost literally, would be the last Westminster-style democracies that still had first past the post. I think that might change the terms of debate there. And of course, the other great argument for retaining first past the post is that it delivers stable majority governments. How many times have we heard that? Well, what are we looking at in Ottawa? We're not looking at stable majority governments, are we? First past the post is no longer part of the solution in that regard. It's part of the problem, among other things, because it's delivering to the Bloc Québécois 50 seats off the start without them even having to try. They barely even have to campaign. Partly as well because we're delivering 89% of their campaign funding via the public subsidy. So we are subsidizing the Bloc Québécois to stall up and gum up the works in Ottawa to demonstrate that Canada is ungovernable. We might want to look at that issue as well, is the public funding aspect. And what we have is we're trying to run 5-party politics through a system that was designed for 2. First past the post works pretty well if you only, aside from a few, well, thank you very much. Aside from a few, it might be too low, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let me just grab it. What happened to my beers?
Drinks right here.
First past the post works pretty well when you only have 2 parties. And indeed, it tends to drive towards 2 parties, other things being equal. But once you get, for one reason or another, a 3rd party, once that model gets broken, it starts to develop a lot of distortions. And once you get to 4 parties, and as we have now, effectively 5 parties, because the Green Party is now consistently polling in excess of 10%, and it's only a matter of time that they will break through, as they just have in Great Britain. Then the model really doesn't work, and it produces all these distortions, of split votes and people being elected, as I say, in ridings with under 30% of the vote, majorities being elected, so-called, with 35% of the vote, huge, as I say, regional distortions as we have in this country, and vast numbers of people whose votes are effectively wasted. As I say, 30% of the vote in the riding gets 100% of the power. The other 70% of the people might as well not have voted. Particularly that's true, and I can tell you from personal experience, I have trudged to the polls every election. I've never yet elected anybody. And maybe sort of the typhoid Mary of elections. But particularly that's true for a Green Party vote. And it's a miracle, again, that almost 1 million voters, Green Party voters, go to the polls every election knowing for certain they're not going to elect anybody. And over time, as I say, the unfairness of this and the inefficiency of it more particularly is going to break down. And I think what particularly has to be paid attention to is, you can rehearse all the arguments about the unfairness of first past the post and the distortions, but I think what really people should focus on is what happens not just on election day, but every day in between. Because the system we have is so highly leveraged, where a 2% swing in the popular vote can lead to a 60 or 80 seat swing, quite literally, in the number of seats that you have in Parliament. Basically, the parties are all walking along on a knife edge, and they know it. And when people are living in that kind of existence, it does strange things to them. It affects their behavior. And what it does with political party leaders is it makes them incredibly risk averse. Because they know if they say something and it goes a little wrong, they're going to lose that 2% of the vote, and it's going to affect their parliamentary standing in a big way. So what typically happens in first past the post is you get long periods of this kind of centrist monotony where nobody's really taking any stand at all. And then come this brief interval of election time, suddenly they throw up a bunch of wedge issues aimed at what? The voters know? No. At the 2% swing vote. The people who make up their minds on the way to the polling booth. And who are being swung this way and that by sort of baubles and gewgaws that have very little to do with anything, but they kind of get people excited. So that's what happens in normal times. Now, in a minority parliament, what you particularly get is, and people who want to argue against proportional representation always say, well, it will condemn us to permanent minority governments. Which I think that's a misrepresentation of it. What you get with proportional representation is the beginning of majority governments, because they're actually put together as coalitions of parties that actually represent the majority of voters. But more particularly, the behavior is very different. In the system we have, as I say, 5-party politics in a system designed for 2, everybody's perpetually got their finger on the button. That is to say, they're all going, if our party goes up 2%, 3% in the polls, bang, we go for an election. Now, there's a certain degree of stability in that, with the arithmetic of the current House, it requires all 3 opposition parties together to make that same calculation. And so that's made it hard for them to do it. But as we've seen on the governing side, if they get enough of a lift in the polls, they force an election. Whereas if you don't have this highly leveraged system, if a 2% swing in the polls means a 2% change in your seat count in the parliament, then there's no payoff. There's no winner take all. There's no percentage. There's no benefit, no advantage in forcing an election, because you're just going to get a pretty similar result. So people calm down and get on with the business of governing. Well, let's start talking briefly. I hope I haven't gone too long. I'll just take a few more minutes just to talk about some of the solutions. I'm just going to throw a bunch of them out. Some you might like, some you probably won't, but maybe that'll sort of gin up the discussion a little bit. I have become more and more convinced that the key to almost all of these reforms that I'm going to talk about starts with restoring local democracy in the parties. Because until and unless you break the power of the party leadership, I don't think you're going to get much changed. Now, thank you. Now, I've talked about this on my blog, and I've been interested in the response because, I actually said, Helena Georges. God knows, it would not be my idea of a great MP, but if the electors, if the members of her riding association would like her to continue as their nominee, in my view, that is their privilege. And I got no time at all for the party command saying, no, we're going to parachute somebody in we like better. It might be advisable for the local riding to dump her, but that's their business. And the response I got was, oh, come on, Coyne, you're going to let her taint the party brand. Of course they're going to ditch her. And it seems to me they're assuming what they want to prove, which is, if you think the leadership owns the party, then yeah, of course they have a right and a responsibility to prevent the tainting of their brand. But if you think the party belongs to the ridings, if the members of parliament matter, in other words, if the leader is the choice of the members rather than the other way around, then you're going to be very protective of the idea that local ridings get to choose their MPs. If for no other reason, then you want the MPs themselves to have the legitimacy, the democratic accountability to their local riding that would make them fit to choose the leader. I don't want a bunch of remote, unaccountable, entrenched MPs choosing the leader either. I can understand why people would be averse to that. But if you have MPs who really have to answer to their local riding, then I think that is a very democratic model of choosing the leader.